Good morning. So it's Thursday, which means that the week is almost over, and I know I'm excited. I think this was a very productive week for me. I think that I was able to get a lot done, but there's still tomorrow and the day after and Saturday, and I was kind of like hoping that I could get more stuff done. Yesterday I wasn't really able to kind of like work a lot on my novel, but I did do a lot of work on a lot of assignments from school, so that's pretty much what that will be about. And today I have more assignments to work on, so I'll be focusing on them, but I also want to get a little writing done here and there. And I have a feeling that I will be able to actually get stuff done, which is great. It's kind of like all that I want for now. That's all that I need for now. It's just like this kind of like certainty that I'll be able to get something done. Because also yesterday, like I ended up like trying to kind of like work my novel a couple of times, but then I was kind of like stuck, which is when I ended up pivoting to like my assignments. But today I think I'll be able to, because I am at this stage where I'm connecting things. So I have two parts of a chapter, and I have to make a connection between them, and that can be something that will flow naturally, or it can be something that is going to take a little while. And there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to kind of like keep pressing, but not pressing too much, because I think it is a really good skill for you to have. To know when to stop. And all that. Also regarding my flu, I took a little medication yesterday, and I also had some tea. It was ginger, lemon, and honey, and I think that I woke up much better. My nose is still stuffy, but it is not. I don't have a runny nose anymore, so like that's already great. And also like my sneezing, it has less snot, so that's positive for me. But yeah, but that being said, like the theme of this video, which is like lowering my standards. When I say it like that, it sounds bad. It sounds like there's been a bit of a downgrade, but that is not at all what I mean. Because also like my standards were not particularly great to begin with. They were just like basic human decency, and sometimes people were even missing the mark. But something that I have come to kind of like accept, because before I kind of like didn't accept that, is that people, even good people, they can get caught up on like their ideas, their ideologies, and then stop seeing people as people and see them as them. So like the enemy, the others, and that ends up kind of like leading to people dehumanizing other individuals, so they don't see what they're saying, what they're doing as being harmful. And none of this is groundbreaking, like I'm pretty sure everybody knows this, but I think that humanizing these people was something that for the longest time I refused to do. And maybe I think from like a moral standpoint I should still kind of like refuse to do that, because like a lot of, even if people don't mean any harm, like their views impact the way that they interact with people, the way that they vote. So there is an impact here. There is something to consider. And it's kind of like bad when, oh, hold on, I usually drink a lot of water, but like now with the flu I have to drink even more. I am also I'm feeling a little more thirsty, so that kind of like also helps me consuming more water. But back to what I was saying, so yeah, so I think good people can, like people who have like good intentions and who really care about human beings, they can get caught up in this point where they care about certain human beings, not everybody. And I'm not, honestly, I don't feel like I am at a point to judge, because for so long I was so caught up in some of like the situations, that I think that I also stopped caring about well-being about certain people. And once again, like I don't think that it is part, because I wasn't really inconsistent. I wasn't, I kind of like had set things set out, and I was living like my morals, my principles, like I was living according to kind of like them. So it was yeah, so like I was consistent. There was consistency in the way that I was doing things, but it's also like not like the best. But all this discussion, internal discussion I've been having, it came about when I realized that what if people who are kind of like close to me, I learned that they have certain views, if they think a certain way, that they defend certain things. And it's interesting because I kind of like my positioning changed, because when I was younger it would be very much like, oh, you think this way, bye, I don't want you to interact with me, which was my right, like I have a right to choose who I'll be interacting with. And if you defend certain notions, I don't have an obligation to kind of like stay around. But like these days I'm thinking about what about, because there's also people who are close to me. I'm thinking about my family, who they defend certain things, and I kind of like I give them break, not because it wasn't for their sake, it was mostly for my own, because getting into conversations and discussions about politics and religion was not what it was carved out to be. I mean, it was exactly what it was carved out to be. But I think I mentioned this before, that I had kind of like this, I have the opposite of a conflict avoidant personality. Like whenever there's conflict, I rise to the occasion, and I ended up kind of like getting invested, getting kind of like caught up in that conflict. And that was not really healthy for me, because it led to me kind of like being exposed to a lot of bullshit, and I don't really have to do that to myself. So it's pretty much when so I think in a way, that's pretty much what I mean when I'm like lowering my standards, is that I'm kind of like being open to like people thinking certain ways. It's not that I have any issue with people thinking differently from me, like not at all. I welcome like this diversity of opinions, but there are certain things that as I said, like they have to do with ethics. Basically they have to do with like your principles, your morals. And it's kind of hard for you to kind of like isolate yourself from like those interactions. I haven't cleaned my nose at all, and it's been almost 7 minutes. So pretty much what I meant when I said that I think I'm getting better. But what I was saying is that on one hand, like removing myself from the situation, it can be kind of like the best solution, because it leads to kind of like having to be in a place where I'm tempted to kind of like intervene or say something. Because right now, as I said before, when it comes to kind of like family and friends, like everybody knows what I think. So if that hasn't convinced anyone before, like it's not going to be right now that is going to happen. So I don't want to have these discussions, but at the same time, what I really meant when I said that I've been lowering my standards, is that I'm kind of looking at those people, and I'm like overlooking. I know this sounds bad, this sounds like I'm compromising my morals, and that's not great. But there is an element of me feeling, I guess, defeated in my present life, because people are not going to change, and it's a choice of like, do I want them in my life or not. And also sometimes it's not even like, yeah, I want them in my life. It's more of a they are here, and if I get caught up on these things every time, I will suffer more, and I don't want to suffer. I think life is already brings enough suffering as it is. I don't want to add to it. I don't need even more things for me to get upset about. So I kind of like started to consider certain things. I am not changing my views, like there's not always happening, but I am starting to be a little bit more forgiving of people and what they think. I'm trying to think of like the positives, because why is that they think there's a certain harmful notion that they defend, like what exactly is that coming from? And you realize that it comes from a place of them caring about somebody. The issue is like who specifically they're caring about, and who by caring about those people they're not caring, like they're not concerned about. And the thing about this is that politics and religion is very much interlaced, at least like in some areas. I wish that wasn't the case, because it is a secular state, but the people are religious, and they use religion to kind of get ahead, and to kind of like guide their business, because it's also an interesting exercise for you to do. Why somebody who is like you, who has the same struggles and like the same cares, like why would they sign with like the opposite idea? Like why would they kind of like go all the way over there? And when you start doing that, you realize that their fears, their anxieties, and even if they are kind of like confounded, because that's not really where we're heading, there's still, I don't know, I'm trying to, I guess, like look, see, the best, in people. I'm trying to kind of like get to a point where I am, as I said, like I'm just trying to kind of like see where this is going, and kind of like give people the benefit of the doubt. I think that is, another way of putting this. I am kind of like seeing people kind of like, I don't know, because there's also degrees to things, like not everybody is going to be on the extreme and just thinking all those harmful things and just defending all those harmful values and all that. There is kind of a yeah, there's and that's something that I was kind of like thinking about, because there is this classmate of mine, and based on some context clues, I have kind of like put together that she is not, because I will say that in general, my class has a certain notion of how things should be, and I subscribe to that notion, so I'm kind of like very much at home there. But some people, they might think differently. So this particular classmate of mine, I've been observing that she, the way she responds to things, that she kind of like might have a little bit of like a different take, but at the same time, like I realized that she's not really at this extreme, because there are things that she kind of like doesn't like mind, or that she doesn't care, that isn't really a part of like her caring. So like the things that she does think, like why exactly can I be forgiving of them? And I realized that based on when I saw that, I can. I was like, okay, this is not somebody I interact with a whole lot, but it was pretty much yesterday when I was in class. That's pretty much when I realized, like, oh my god, I'm kind of like lowering my standards a little bit, but that is making life easier for me. And also, I'm trying to kind of like look at others, the others, as them, the enemy, whatever, however you want to put it. And I'm trying to find positives in what they kind of like, in to what they have to say, basically, because and like the things, because also like ultimately everybody thinks that they are defending what is best for them, number one, but also for society. And there are some ideas and notions that are defended. I'm like, yeah, this is not going to work out. Like, look at the past 500 years. Like, this hasn't worked since then. Of course, it's not going to work now. But people still defend that. But this is another thing that I was kind of that I was kind of like talking about that because in my class we watched a video of like this man, and my professor, she kind of like clicked on the wrong link first, because it was the difference between ethics and morals, which I do think that the person talking like made a really good distinction. He made this metaphor where like morals is pretty much what you do, pretty much you live alone, like you do things, and that it's kind of like morals. But then like when you have somebody else lives with you, be it like a partner or roommate or whatever, certainly like the way that you behave, you have to consider a person as well. It's something like that. I'm not doing a good job explaining it, but it was an interesting one, because it brought me back to my philosophy and sociology lessons back in high school, which were two subjects that I really liked. So it's always nice when you kind of like have a limit. But before that, she started playing like this video about like it was the same man, and he was talking about how like trust, and we're not trusting anymore. And the thing is that kind of like conversation that he could have go to like a very specific place, and that place would make me kind of like uncomfortable, because basically a lot of people like to kind of like look at the present times and say that it is worse in some regards. And honestly, I'll be honest, like my personal take is that things are not necessarily worse. It's just that now we have the ability to kind of like broadcast those things. So basically, so that's kind of like that. So you kind of like have, like you're exposed to, many more things going wrong. Naturally, like you could argue that some things are worse, and I think that it doesn't necessarily have to do with the times. It has to do with like how is how much easier it is. For example, with scams. There's always been people scamming other people, but like right now we have the means to do it. Like in many more ways. So I don't think that like society is collapsing because of that, because that is ultimately the thing. A lot of people, they get very, not pessimistic necessarily, but like they get very fatalistic, very dramatic, like right away. It's like, okay, so this is the end of society as we know it, and like, dude, it's not gonna happen. I mean, it can happen, but if it does happen, it's not going to be like that. Uh, I don't know, because I feel this also has to do with my experience of things getting worse, but at the same time like them not really changing a whole lot, because this is ultimately I think where this whole idea of like me lowering my standards is started. Just kind of like me thinking about the worst case scenario. We have elections this year, so like what would be the worst case scenario, and I think about like the situation in the past, and what has happened, and like what like not that much changed, for me specifically, like on my daily life. I was still very much like things, they kind of like they stay the same for me. I know this sounds selfish, because I'm just looking, at the entire, like looking at the entirety of society. I'm looking at my personal life, but that is a way for me to feel like more at ease with the way that things are going. That ultimately it doesn't really matter, because like it is, yeah, like it is what it is. But yeah, so back to the lowering my standards. I kind of like I realized, and also I was thinking of, because there are sometimes like a lot of the times when you're meeting somebody, like the first thing that you can talk about is politics and religion, as I said. So right away where a person stands, and based on that information you can kind of like continue or not continue your acquaintanceship. And but sometimes like you talk about like a lot of other things, and you don't really know where they stand. You can talk about like deep things, and like deep feelings that you have and all that. But yeah, like, so you don't get to that point, and so you kind of like grow fond of that person. That person becomes a part of your life, and then suddenly you realize that they think what they think is very backwards, let's say. And like what do you do? Because when you talk about this stuff right away, like when you cut whatever contact you have, like you're not really losing much. But when you have somebody where you have kind of like grown to appreciate, then like it is kind of like a problem, because now you're losing something, you're losing someone, if you kind of like go short. And that's pretty much where the thing of like the extreme, it kind of like it can define the way you're doing things, because it can lead to you, yeah, it can lead to you be like, okay, I can make this concession here, I can agree that, also that there is there is a spectrum, there is a middle ground. And I mean, I will say that in my experience the middle ground is just a kind of like excuse, to be kind of like on this side. I never really met somebody who, was a centrist, that they were actually centrist. They just had a veiled, idea of, like the other side. And someone is calling me, probably trying to kind of like sell me something. Not gonna, not gonna accept that call. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that there are, like there is a middle ground, and like where you make concessions. And I'm kind of like starting to examine like what would that be, and whether that is something that like would make sense for me. Because as I said, I'm making concessions, and part of it, like sometimes like those concessions that you're going to make, they will, because I'm trying like to not compromise my morals, basically. Like how can I accept certain things and without sacrificing what I believe in. And that is one of those things that is easier said than done. But I am navigating that. I'm like, okay, so you think differently about this, okay, we can make it work. But there are certain things that like if you think, then I have to kind of like hold up. Lost it. But yeah, there are certain things that you have to consider because you don't want to kind of like sacrifice yourself for like those measly interactions. But yeah, but as I said, like I've been kind of like running a lot of like scenarios in my head of what the things are that I would compromise and the things that I wouldn't. And I'm kind of like, it's not really a timetable that I'm kind of like assembling, but it's something like that. I'm just like, okay, so you think differently on this. Also, like a lot of things have to do also with how things are presented. Because if you're kind of like super abrasive and super toxic in the way you kind of like presenting something, which I think is also the case with like this classmate of mine, because she's not really like that. Whenever she's saying something, she's respectful. So I think it's kind of easy for you to just have a working relation with a person like that. Because some people, they just really go from like one extreme to the other when they are kind of like talking about things, and it's very off-putting. Like, why are you demonizing people? Why are there all these straw men? Like, why straw men? And it's kind of like an interesting juxtaposition of like a person's notions versus the way that they present it. And that is also something that I've been learning, that like if you can position yourself in a healthy way, in a way that you're not really kind of like attacking people or anything, I think that we can kind of like make it work. Although like there is an argument to say that like if it is something that you consider to be so bad, like why are you so reasonably talking about this? Naturally, like you want everybody to be reasonable, when you're having a conversation or a discussion. But if that is really something that you think is like the end of the world, so maybe it means that like you don't necessarily think that is the end of the world, and that is a comforting thought in itself, because there are certain things that can get very polarized very quickly, and you have to kind of like learn how to kind of like adapt, because you don't want any ad hominem insults or anything. Like I really want to have a conversation, so we can get to the bottom of this, or maybe not, because I feel a lot of these conversations that we have, like they don't really end with anybody changing their minds. It's just kind of like people affirming what they believe in, why they believe in that, which in itself can be something good, because this is something that I've been thinking about as well, how I haven't really been getting into any conflicts. So like some of like the arguments, I don't think I'm as sharp anymore when it comes to kind of like talking about some of these arguments, because I haven't really been kind of like talking about it for like a little while. So yeah, it can be good for you to just sharpen your senses, but I don't know, I kind of like I'm at this point where I'm like, I don't care. I do care. I am affected, but I'm trying not to care, because that is, just something that, hold on. It's pointless. I end up being the only one who is suffering. So I think the gist of it all of that is I don't want to suffer anymore. I don't want to suffer unnecessarily. So I am kind of like exploring options and considering, different possibilities. And I don't really have an answer, because as I said, like a part of me is like, am I compromising my morals for the sake of, maintaining the status quo? Because it's never really been me. So this is a new territory that I'm like navigating. Like there are things that there are things that I know, because I think sometimes like reflecting on the past. I think about, for example, back in 2016, I was part of like this youth group. The idea was kind of like mold leaders. So every once a week we would meet, and there would be kind of like a speaker or a topic, and we would discuss. And basically, like this youth group was a ramification of an adult group. I mean, I was 18, but like that is still considered to be youth. And they had this adult group, and they kind of like had a lot of like different events that they took part in. And the other day, I received an email of one of these events that they were making. I hadn't really heard from them like in years, but my email must still be there. And one of the people who will be talking was this very polarizing politician. And so it was one of those moments that I was like, oh, you guys are siding with this. I think I could have imagined that, but I hadn't really thought about them in a while. So you think about like, what is the justification of you having this person, even after everything they said, everything that was defended, and that this person fought for. and you kind of like realize that there are certain things that people overlook. You know, like they have their certain notions that they kind of like don't consider when you know like when they're and that's the thing, like because for them those are compromises, and you know to me they're not. You know, they have to do with who I am, and there's like an attack on my person, my character, my you know like some of you know the elements about my existence. So you know to me those are not negotiable, but to other people who are not you know like in part of like whatever you know group I'm part of, like they you can kind of like overlook that, and you kind of like ignore those things to focus on the things that you know you kind of like agree with, you know the things that align with you know like I know some principles. So basically, like they do that. So can I do the same thing? You know, like should I do the same thing? That is a good question. Like should I start overlooking things? Because it feels bad. It feels like I am, as I said before, I'm compromising my values. You know, my morals. But you know, like there is. It's not very practical. Like that is pretty much the wall that I'm hitting. That I can keep the same, you know, defending the same things, but you know, like I'm gonna keep hitting walls because you know like life is happening outside. You know like things are happening outside. It's not just you know a discussion on Twitter. I don't have Twitter, you know, like I haven't had I think since 2021. But it's interesting how like a lot of like the discussions that I've had when I did have it, which was like 2016, so it was 5 years. A lot of discussions that I had, they were they stuck with me, you know, like they really, not in a good way, you know, like it's just that I would think about things that were being said, things that were, you know, things that people defended, things that people attacked. And at the time, like as I said before, like I already had, I still had the verve to kind of like respond to things and try to have conversations. And that is, as I said, like a lot of my experience was people not really wanted to have a conversation. They wanted to kind of like establish what they thought, and they didn't want to hear anyone who had a contradictory opinion or had you know proof that what they were saying did not make sense, or that you know whatever they were defending would not be helpful to them. Because ultimately this is something that happens a lot. It's you know people defending certain values. They've been kind of like you know, like spoon-fed certain notions, and then defend something that is not really good for them. I think a very classic example is people defending things that benefit only billionaires, because they have this notion that one day they will be a billionaire. So like they want, though they want that ease, you know, like they want that those benefits, and you know by doing that they're kind of like you know doing something that is bad for them as they are, and as they likely will always be. You know, it's you know you're not gonna be able to. And it's interesting because like I kind of like relate to some of this. When I was younger, I really thought that you know like I was going to be a billionaire. So basically I would defend certain things that were kind of like counterintuitive to me at the time and to me presently as well, for the sake of you know the person who I would become, you know, in the future. And that so I kind of like I understand the plea, and I understand where people are coming from, but like I think the fact that like I've been able to break free from that illusion sometimes make me a little impatient with other people, because it's like, okay, I broke free, why can't you? But yeah, so compromising, you know, am I compromising my morals by kind of like accepting some things? And as I said, I have a timetable of things that I can be kind of like okay if you disagree, and there's already you know like a question rising, you know, in terms of is this, you know, am I compromising, you know, myself? Am I becoming a hypocrite? Am I becoming, you know, mindless, you know, numbed version of myself? Because as I said, practicability is kind of like the key word here. Because why am I doing all this? Why am I lowering my standards? And ultimately, it is for you know practical reasons. It's because if I kind of like keep on being you know so adamant about certain things, I will kind of yeah like I will kind of like have a lot more conflict in my life, and I don't want that, you know, like I want to live freely, but you know like then so I think it's all about balance. Like I have to find a good balance between you know like me kind of like you know not you know struggling, not suffering so much, but also like maintaining you know like kind of like not maintaining the status quo, but like keeping you know staying true to myself. you know. And it's interesting because like this is still like an ongoing thing. So I don't know, like there are some, and also like sometimes in practice things are different. So like right now I have a notion that, you know, if somebody thinks this way, I can overlook that. But you know, like but like maybe when it's actually happening, I realize that like no, I can't overlook that. And the same way the other way around, things that right now I'm like, you know, like this is it and that's that. And then when I have faced a situation in life where I have somebody who is kind of, yeah, somebody who is kind of like presenting those notions, I realize that it's not that big of a deal. You know, it's not a deal. Maybe it is a big deal, but like it's not a deal breaker. And that is itself. So as I said, practicality is kind of like the name of the game because I am, you know, I'm tired of suffering, and all of this, you know, the lowering of my standards, is so I can live more comfortably. And maybe this is a bad thing because I'm kind of like sacrificing, you know, some of my morals I get, you know, for comfort. And the thing is, like, I feel the need to explain myself because, I mean, like, I think it makes sense that I want to explain myself, you know, like, because I'm basically saying that I'm compromising and making compromises of things that shouldn't be compromisable. But I do think that this is having a positive effect on my mind because things are not affecting me as much. So I'm suffering less, basically. So I think that's it. So, anyways, bye.